He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow.
Wow. Powerful words.
Aren't they? From Viktor Frankl. And they really hit at that incredible human thing, finding meaning even when things are, well, unimaginable.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're doing today, really getting into that. For you, our listener, we know you want that deep knowledge, but, without getting totally swamped in details.
Right.
So think of this as your direct path into a really profound, really life-affirming book.
And that book is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which, I mean, it's so much more than just his story of surviving the Nazi concentration camps, harrowing as that is.
It really is.
It's a deep look at what actually keeps us going, what gives us strength when everything else is just stripped away.
Mhm.
And the insights in here, they're amplified by forewords for people like Harold Kushner and Gordon Allport, and an afterword by William Winslade. It shows the impact, right, across psychology, spirituality.
Yeah, that tells you something. Its reach is huge.
It really is.
Precisely. So we're going to unpack Frankl's core ideas about finding meaning, even when facing intense suffering. The aim here is to see how this whole concept, this will to meaning, can give you a really valuable new perspective on your own life.
Build resilience, find a deeper sense of purpose, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start where Frankl started, in that extreme context that shaped his thinking. The concentration camp experience.
Right. The arrival itself, it was designed as a total assault on identity. Frankl talks about this brutal dehumanization.
Yeah.
Losing possessions, clothing, hair, even your name. You became a number. He was 119,104
Ton, your identity erase.
instantly. And what made it even weirder, more disturbing, was seeing the prisoners who'd been there longer.
How so?
They seemed almost, well, not well-fed, but less starved, and they were making these dark jokes. It was such a stark contrast to the terrified newcomers.
That's jarring. And didn't he mention something about them getting liquor?
Yeah, schnapps. Bartering for it somehow. And then the really horrifying detail. The SS providing unlimited liquor for the prisoners forced to work in the gas chambers and crematoriums.
God, that's unthinkable. What does that even do to a person's mind?
It speaks volumes about the psychological coping or breaking mechanisms in those extremes.
Yeah.
And after that initial shock, then came the selections.
The deciding who lives, who dies.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Based mostly on whether you looked fit enough to work. And in that environment, survival instincts just took over.
Morality kind of goes out the window.
Often, yeah. People acted ruthlessly, sometimes against each other, just to survive. Frankl mentions this negative selection for the capos, the prisoner functionaries.
How does that work?
Well, brutality towards other prisoners was often rewarded by the guards. And among the general prisoners, there was a sort of self-selection, too. The ones who survived often had to lose all their scruples, basically.
Yet Frankl wanted to document this,
Right.
even then.
Remarkably, yes. That was his initial drive. It shows that even when everything external is gone, that inner core, that search for meaning, or at least for understanding, it persists. Though sometimes, in really twisted ways.
And the psychological impact on the new arrivals? The shock, the disbelief.
Immense. Frankl talks about that. And also those fleeting thoughts of suicide.
Running into the wire.
That chilling phrase, yes. Touching the electrified fence. It's strange, he said, in those first days, the trauma almost pushed aside the actual fear of death itself.
Which is hard to imagine, but then that fear must have come back.
Oh, absolutely. He talks later about the tortures of longing for home, for family, just this overwhelming ache.
Yeah.
And combined with that was this constant, pervasive disgust, the filth, the degradation. It was inescapable.
He mentioned being forced to clean latrines.
Yes, the newcomers. And if you showed any normal reaction, any revulsion,
Yeah.
you were punished severely.
So you had to just shut down emotionally.
Pretty much. You had to suppress those basic human responses just to survive the moment.
He gives that example of watching punishment parades.
Right. At first, horror, but later, just indifference. Even seeing corpses being removed from the typhus ward became routine, just another grim task.
The mind just numbs itself.
It has to, I suppose, to cope with that level of unrelenting trauma.
But paradoxically, he also saw something else happening, didn't he? Something about the inner life.
Yes, exactly. Amidst all that physical and mental hardship, for many, there was a deepening of their spiritual or inner life.
Really? How so?
He noticed that more sensitive people, those with rich intellectual lives, even if they were physically weaker, sometimes showed this surprising resilience. Their strength came from within.
Like drawing on inner resources.
Precisely. He shares that incredibly moving image of having a silent conversation with his wife while he was digging a trench.
Feeling her presence.
So strongly, yes,
Hmm.
as if she were right there. And that moment with the bird landing near him, it's almost surreal. It
Wow.
shows how the human spirit can find these anchors, these moments of solace, even in the absolute worst conditions.
And there were other glimmers too, right? Small things.
Yes, what he called negative happiness,
Negative happiness.
like the sheer relief and gratitude for tiny mercies.
Yeah,
Getting deloused, for example. A small thing, but huge in that context.
I can imagine.
Or the story of the cook who distributed the soup fairly.
Yeah.
Just a small act of basic fairness, but it stood out so much against all the brutality.
Yeah, little bits of humanity surviving.
Exactly. He also talks about his own mixed feelings about being in the sick quarters, relatively more comfortable, but still part of that horrific system.
The whole system was designed to crush individuality, wasn't it?
Completely.
Yeah.
To make everyone just part of a mass, valueless. But Frankl stresses that inner struggle many prisoners had.
To hold on to what? Dignity, self-respect?
Yes, exactly that. That sense of inner freedom, even if everything else was controlled. He quotes Dostoevsky.
There is only one thing that I dread, not to be worthy of my sufferings.
That's the one. It points to that deep human need to find meaning, to make even suffering count for something.
And love still found a way in.
It did. That story of him hearing the violin playing a birthday tune and instantly thinking of his wife, it's so poignant.
It really is.
And he also mentioned humor, surprisingly,
Humor in a concentration camp.
as a weapon, he called it. A tool for self-preservation. Imagining absurd scenarios about life after liberation, like telling a surgeon how they used to operate. It's a defense mechanism, but a vital one.
A way to keep your spirit from being totally crushed.
Absolutely. And all of this leads him to his most crucial insight, I think.
Which is?
That even there, even in those unimaginable circumstances, people still had a choice.
A choice. What choice?
The freedom to choose their attitude, their response to what was happening to them.
Oh,
He saw men comforting others, sharing their last piece of bread. That wasn't determined by the camp. That was an inner decision.
spiritual freedom, he called it.
Exactly. Who you became, ultimately, was down to that inner choice, not just the
Wow.
external horror.
Which brings us neatly to logotherapy, his whole philosophy.
It does. It's born directly from these experiences.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Logotherapy, what's the absolute core idea?
The core tenet is the will to meaning. Frankl believed the primary motivation for us as humans isn't pleasure, like Freud thought, or power, like Adler proposed,
What meaning?
but the search for meaning, for purpose in our lives. That's the main driver.
And he had evidence for this.
Well, he pointed to opinion polls even back then in France among American students. People consistently said they needed something to live for, a purpose.
More than just happiness or success.
Exactly. And he argued, look, people will sacrifice, even die, for their ideals, for their values. That challenges the idea that values are just, psychological defense mechanisms.
Right. So the takeaway is a lack of purpose can be just as damaging as, say, internal psychological conflict.
That's a huge part of it. This need for meaning is fundamental.
So what happens when that need, the will to meaning, gets blocked? When you can't find it?
That's what he called existential frustration. The thwarting of that basic drive. And that frustration, he argued, can lead to what he termed noogenic neuroses.
Noogenic, what does that mean?
It comes from the Greek word nous, meaning mind or spirit. So these neuroses originate in the spiritual or meaning dimension of human existence, not just the psychological.
So they're different from, like, Freudian neuroses rooted in childhood conflicts.
Distinctly different, yes. He gives this great example of an American diplomat.
Oh, yeah.
Deeply unhappy with his career. Therapist kept digging into his relations with his father, thinking that was the root cause.
But it wasn't.
Turned out his neurosis was basically just profound existential frustration. He found no meaning in his work. Once he changed careers to something fulfilling, the symptoms vanished.
Well, so not all struggle or unhappiness is pathological.
Exactly.
Right.
Sometimes it's a sign you're wrestling with the big questions, striving for meaning, which can actually be healthy.
So if meaning is so vital, where do we find it? Is it something inside us?
That's the interesting thing. Frankl says no, not primarily. He talks about the self-transcendence of human existence.
Self-transcendence, meaning going beyond yourself.
Precisely. Meaning isn't something you just generate internally by navel-gazing. It's discovered out there in the world.
How?
By engaging with something or someone outside yourself, a cause you serve, a meaning you fulfill, a person you love deeply.
So self-actualization, becoming your best self, that's not the main goal.
In logotherapy, it's more like a side effect. It happens almost automatically when you're focused on something meaningful beyond yourself.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. So what are the specific ways, the paths, to find this meaning?
Frankl lays out three main avenues.
Okay.
First, by creating a work or doing a deed. So through achievement, contribution, what you do.
Right, your actions.
Second, by experiencing something or encountering someone.
Mm-hmm.
This could be appreciating beauty, nature, art, but especially connecting with another person. Love, basically. Seeing the uniqueness in them.
Okay, doing and experiencing loving. What's the third?
And this one comes straight from his camp experience. The attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering.
Ah, the choice again.
Yes. So find purpose in what you do, who you love, or how you face what you cannot change.
That third one, finding meaning in suffering. That feels so central to Frankl. Is he saying suffering is good or necessary?
No, not at all. He's very clear. Suffering isn't required for meaning. Life can be meaningful without it. But meaning is still possible even when suffering is present, if that suffering is unavoidable. You can't change the situation, but you can choose your stance towards it.
Right.
He quotes another psychiatrist, Edith Weisskopf-Joelson, who pointed out something interesting,
What's that?
that our modern society puts so much pressure on being happy all the time.
Which can make you feel worse if you're not happy.
Exactly. It adds this extra burden. You feel like a failure for feeling bad, even if the suffering is legitimate and unavoidable.
That's a really good point.
And Frankl had this incredibly personal moment related to this. After his original manuscript was confiscated and lost in the camp.
Yeah.
Later, he found a single torn page from a Hebrew prayer book in the pocket of a coat he was given.
Wow. What did he make of that?
He saw it not just as like a random event, but as a challenge, a call to live the thoughts he had planned to write, to embody them.
To find meaning in the loss itself, in a way.
In the response to the loss, yes.
So these ideas, they sound like they'd be really useful in therapy.
Oh, absolutely. Frankl talked about metaclinical problems.
Meaning problems beyond the usual clinical diagnoses.
Exactly. People coming for help, not with classic neuroses, but with fundamental questions about life's meaning, about purpose, existential angst, basically.
You're right.
And he used techniques like logodrama. He gives this powerful example of a mother who'd lost one son and was caring for another who was severely disabled.
Okay.
He asked her to imagine herself on her deathbed, looking back. And from that perspective, she suddenly saw the profound meaning in her life, the meaning she found in loving and caring for her disabled son, despite the pain of losing the other.
That's quite a perspective shift.
Isn't it? He contrasted that with another woman who chased wealth her whole life, only to feel on her deathbed that it was all empty, a failure.
So logotherapy helps you uncover your own specific meaning.
Precisely. It's not prescriptive. It helps you find what resonates for you.
What about the really big questions, like the ultimate meaning of life, capital M meaning? Does logotherapy go there?
It does, in a way. Frankl talks about a super meaning.
Super meaning?
An ultimate meaning may be a cosmic purpose that's probably beyond our human ability to fully grasp intellectually.
So we can't know it.
We likely can't fully comprehend it. And Frankl says we need a kind of faith, an ability to bear that inability to grasp the absolute unconditional meaningfulness of existence.
Like accepting there are limits to our understanding.
Exactly. He uses this little anecdote about a child asking why God would send measles.
Yeah.
It illustrates how some things are just beyond our simple explanation.
Yeah.
But interestingly, he also said logotherapy can work with a person's existing religious faith. It can be a resource. He tells the story of a rabbi who lost his wife and children in the Holocaust. Utterly devastating.
Unimaginable.
And Frankl helped him explore the potential meaning in his survival and his suffering. Maybe it was a kind of purification, a way to meet his lost loved ones again in eternity, worthy of them. It tapped into the rabbi's own deep faith.
So it uses the person's own belief system as a strength.
Yes, respectfully and therapeutically.
Frankl also talked about the past, didn't he? As a source of meaning.
Yes, that's really important too. He argues the past isn't just gone.
What is it then?
It's a storehouse of reality. Everything you've lived through, your achievements, the love you've experienced, even the suffering you've endured with courage, it's real. It's been actualized.
And no one can take that away.
Exactly. It can be a tremendous source of meaning, pride, and joy, especially later in life when maybe the future holds fewer possibilities. The past holds your realized values.
So logotherapy isn't just philosophy. It has actual techniques therapists can use.
Right. It's a practical approach, too. One key technique is paradoxical intention.
Paradoxical intention. Sounds contradictory.
It kind of is. It's mainly for tackling anticipatory anxiety.
Like worrying about something before it happens.
Yes, and how that worry can actually cause the thing you fear. Like someone terrified of blushing in public.
Blushes because they're so worried about blushing.
Exactly. Or someone trying too hard to perform sexually, and the effort itself causes the problem.
Okay, so what does paradoxical intention do?
It encourages the person to, just for a moment, intentionally wish for the very thing they fear.
Wish for it. Wish to blush.
Yes, or wish to sweat or wish to tremble. Frankl tells of a doctor who feared sweating excessively in front of patients.
Okay.
Frankl had him decide, okay, next time I see a patient, I'm going to show them just how much I can sweat. I'll sweat buckets.
Seriously, what happened?
The anxiety lessened, and eventually the excessive sweating stopped. By intentionally trying to do it, the fear lost its power.
Wow. That requires some humor, though, right?
Definitely. Humor and a sense of self-detachment are crucial for it to work. You sort of mock the fear.
That's fascinating. What else? Any other techniques?
Related to that is dealing with hyperintention and hyperreflection.
Better intention, like trying too hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially in sexual neurosis, trying too hard to achieve orgasm or erection. And hyperreflection is being overly focused on yourself, like someone with frigidity being too aware of their own bodily sensations instead of connecting with their partner.
Right. So how does logotherapy address that?
With dereflection,
Dereflection, focusing away.
pretty much. Actively redirecting your attention away from yourself and your symptoms and towards your partner or towards the meaning in your work or something else outside yourself.
Like that woman with frigidity you mentioned.
Yes, her issue resolved when she learned to focus her attention fully on her partner during intimacy rather than on her own responses.
So again, it's about getting out of your own head, looking outward. Self-transcendence.
That's the key principle running through it. Neurotic self-concern often eases when you're genuinely focused on something bigger than yourself.
What about something common like trouble sleeping? Does this apply?
Yes, Frankl points out the fear of sleeplessness is a classic example. You worry about not sleeping,
So you try really hard to force yourself to sleep.
which creates hyperintention and makes sleep impossible.
The vicious cycle.
Exactly. So the paradoxical intention here is try to stay awake.
Try to stay awake.
Decide you're going to stay awake as long as possible. Read a book. Do something quiet. By removing the pressure and the fear, sleep often comes naturally.
It really flips the script, doesn't it?
It does. It short circuits that anxiety loop.
And underlying all these techniques is that fundamental idea of focusing outward.
Yes. Dereflection works best, Frankl argued, when you genuinely have something meaningful to focus on your work, a relationship, a cause. That self-transcendent orientation is the foundation.
Frankl seems incredibly strong on the idea of human freedom, too. Choosing your response.
Oh, fiercely so. He absolutely rejected what he called pan-determinism.
Pan-determinism, meaning everything is determined.
Yes, the view that we're just products of biology, psychology, society. That there's no real freedom, no real choice.
And having lived through the camps.
He spoke with incredible authority. He saw people subjected to the same horrific conditions react in vastly different ways. He argued we're not just puppets of circumstance. We always retain the freedom to take a stand towards our conditions.
Even in the worst possible situation.
Even then, he tells this amazing story about a Dr. J,
Who was he?
known as the mass murderer of Steinhoff, apparently responsible for euthanasia actions. A terrible figure.
Okay.
But in prison, after the war, this same man showed incredible kindness and compassion to his fellow prisoners.
Really? How does Frankl explain that?
As proof that people aren't fixed, we contain potentials for both good and evil. Which potential we actualize depends on our choices, our decisions, not just our conditioning or circumstances.
We determine ourselves, ultimately.
That was his core belief.
Okay, this leads us to the postscript he added later. The case for a tragic optimism. Intriguing title. What's tragic optimism?
It sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?
It does.
Basically, it means staying optimistic, saying yes to life, despite what he calls the tragic triad.
The tragic triad.
Pain, guilt, and death. The unavoidable tough stuff of human existence.
So optimism in the face of that?
Yes. And not just passively accepting it, but actively finding ways to turn those negative aspects into something positive or constructive.
How do you do that?
Well, he lays out 3 ways, echoing his paths to meaning. First, turning suffering into a human achievement.
The attitude choice again, finding meaning in how you bear it.
Exactly. Second, deriving from guilt the opportunity to change oneself for the better.
Using mistakes as fuel for growth.
Right. And third, deriving from life's transitoriness an incentive to take responsible action.
Because life is short, make it count.
Precisely. Knowing our time is limited should motivate us to act meaningfully now. He contrasts this genuine optimism with, like, forced happiness, that hyper-intention again. Real optimism needs a reason, a why.
Yeah. And he saw a lack of this meaning in modern society too, right? Not just in extreme situations.
Oh, yes. He talked about the no future generation, the drug scene.
Yeah.
He saw these as symptoms of widespread existential frustration.
People feeling lost, adrift.
Yeah. He cited stats showing how common the feeling of meaninglessness was becoming. He famously said people have enough to live by, but often nothing to live for.
Material comfort isn't enough.
Not on its own.
Yeah.
He linked this to things like unemployment neurosis, not just the lack of money, but the lack of meaningful activity causing distress.
Is that feeling of meaninglessness itself a sickness?
He was careful there. He said it's not necessarily pathological in itself, but it can be pathogenic.
Meaning it can lead to problems.
Yes, it can contribute to depression, aggression, addiction, if that void isn't addressed.
But finding meaning isn't necessarily some huge philosophical quest, is it? He seemed to ground it.
Very much so. He stressed that perceiving meaning is usually quite down to earth.
Oh.
It's about recognizing what you can do in this specific situation. What responsibility can you take right here, right now? It's concrete.
Not abstract.
Not abstract. He even touches briefly on the idea that our conscience, our sense of values that guides us, might have biological roots shaped by evolution.
Interesting. And he comes back to those main pathways.
Always. Work and deeds, yes. But also experiencing life, appreciating beauty, and especially loving other people. That's huge.
And suffering.
And that third way, the attitude toward unavoidable suffering. Mastering hardship with dignity is, in itself, a profound source of meaning. He mentioned an Austrian poll where people highly esteemed those who faced hardship well.
So it's respected.
Deeply. And he brings back that idea about aging, too.
The past versus the future.
Yeah. Young people have future possibilities, which is great.
Yeah.
But older people have realities in their past. Things achieved, love shared, suffering endured bravely.
That's a treasure the young can, in a way, envy. It's already banked. That's a beautiful way to put it. It's interesting, though, that Frankl, having developed this whole system, he didn't want followers, did he?
No, he was very clear about that. He stressed logotherapy should be undogmatic. He wanted to inspire independent thinking, not create disciples. He joked about degurification.
Degurification, I like that.
Right. And he powerfully refuted Freud's idea that under extreme stress, like starvation, everyone becomes the same.
What did Frankl say happened?
He said in the camps, people became more different. The brutal conditions stripped away the superficial layers and revealed the core.
You revealing what?
Both the absolute worst, the swine, as he put it, and the absolute best, the saints. People capable of incredible cruelty and people capable of astonishing self-sacrifice.
Like Father Maximilian Kolbe.
Exactly. The priest who volunteered to die in place of another prisoner at Auschwitz. A profound example of choosing meaning and goodness even in hell.
Which leads to that incredibly stark closing thought he offers.
Yeah. Since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of.
Yeah.
And since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake.
Chilling. Powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, so wrapping up this incredibly rich deep dive, what's the single biggest thing you want listeners to take away from Frankl?
I think it has to be that dual message. First, our profound, almost unbelievable capacity as humans to find meaning, even in the darkest times. And second, tied to that, the power, we always have the power to choose our attitude, our response to whatever life throws at us.
And for you listening, how can you bring this home? How can you use these insights right now?
Just take a moment, maybe later today, and reflect. What truly gives your life meaning right now? What's your why?
Yeah.
Where do you find purpose in your work, your relationships, your passions? And how do you handle the tough stuff, the unavoidable suffering? What attitude do you choose?
Are your daily choices lining up with what you find meaningful?
Exactly. Frankl's work is really an invitation to ask those questions actively, honestly.
This has been absolutely fascinating, really thought-provoking. And if you, our listener, are intrigued, we really can't recommend enough reading Man's Search for Meaning yourself.
It's a classic for a reason. Short, but incredibly dense with wisdom.
It truly is. So we'll leave you with that question to ponder, maybe the most important one Frankl asks us. Why will guide you through your how.
Spend some time with that one.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.